Hello, my name is Angelica Garcia-Randle, and I will be covering how food justice is a critical issue here with the migrant community in the United States. So, how many people pick their tomatoes themselves? If I could get a raise of hands. Okay. How many people grow and pick their tomatoes and harvest by themselves? So, who in this room has picked tomatoes in a field for a commercial agricultural company? Who's had experience with migrant farm working? Raise your hands. So, for those of us that eat tomatoes and other vegetables, it is very important for us to know where our food comes from and who's affected by the carbon footprint of that. We have so many people here in this country that come to work as labor on visas, on work visas, H-2A visas, provided by the government through agricultural industries. And a lot of people aren't aware of that. A lot of people say, migrant workers or Latinos are here taking our jobs, and they don't understand that there's a little bit more to it than just people coming here to the country and taking our jobs. When American countries actually recruit workers from foreign countries on visas to bring them here because the labor is cheap and they work hard for very little, and they go out in extreme conditions that us Americans would, frown upon. So it's important for us to understand where our food comes from and how that affects the people that are harvesting the food. So, as a daughter of immigrants and migrant farm workers, I have firsthand information as to how this affects families and lives of people. My father came from Mexico, and he worked in the fields in Central California. He was a migrant farm worker with the Cesar Chavez movement, and he worked just enormous amount of hours and had to endure a lot of physical and mental exhaustion to pick produce for the big agricultural companies. And as a result of that, we lived it firsthand. We lived in migrant housing, my parents and my brothers and sisters and I, and there was very little money to be made, and we had to grow up in limited resources, when it comes to food itself. We had very limited food because my father made very little money and my mother was taking care of us. She cleaned houses when she could. But we experienced firsthand how it was, the irony of my father working in the fields and then us having very little food to eat. Okay. And then we grew up in a, bilingual environment. And so my parents were speaking Spanish to us. We were trying to speak English to fit in with the kids. So it's this bicultural environment where we learned about those two worlds. Okay. And, the people that I work with now here on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, as I run a food pantry, I'm a food pantry director for a pantry called Dos Santos, which means two saints. It's a ministry, an outreach ministry from two churches that came together, St. James and St. George. And here on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, I run the food pantry that is geared specifically for migrant farm workers and the Latino community because they work these excessive backbreaking jobs and make very little money to make their ends meet. So they are the working poor in this country. Okay, so I have firsthand information about how this issue affects their lives. On the topic of immigration in the U.S., we have so many people. This is a very polarizing topic right now, especially under the current administration. The attitude towards immigrants, let alone migrant farm workers, but immigrants in general, is very negative. People feel like, they are coming to our country, taking our jobs, send them back. You hear all this, back and forth. But right now, the climate of the current administration, our president is saying, hey, we want people out of this country. Go away, make America great. We're going to keep our jobs for Americans. But the question is this: what would happen if that whole labor force left? If we had no more migrant labor doing the agricultural jobs, picking the produce in the fields, harvesting. What if we lost all our labor at the chicken processing plants here in Virginia and Maryland? What would happen? How would that affect us? It's tremendous. And I'm not sure that Americans would take those low-paying jobs. I think it's something to consider. We say bring back jobs to America, or the foreigners are taking our jobs, but consider if everything went away, if all the labor force from Latino immigrants and migrant farm workers went away for our produce companies like Del Monte, or our chicken processing plants like Purdue and Tyson, what would happen? We would really be in trouble, because to fill those spots would take a lot of effort, and I don't know that the industry would survive. Okay, so the area of food justice and injustice, it goes beyond just a political thing. Okay, yes, our president has issued an executive order to come down hard on immigration, crack down on people that are working here illegally. But I argue that it will affect the American economy in more ways than we have really thought about it to be. So it's not just food related, it's a human rights condition. People dehumanize workers, and they say, oh, they look different than us, they don't speak our language, what are they doing here? The mistreatment of workers is really sad and very difficult. Okay, and I have witnessed this firsthand. I talk to people on a daily basis who are, dealing with food insecurity, and they're working. They're the working poor. They are immigrants, and they're here, and they're saying, I can't buy produce. So it's very tragic and ironic that we are benefiting from people and their labor and their work. We're mistreating them, and they don't have enough to eat. That's just wrong on so many levels. Okay, then this affects more than just the workers themselves. This affects their families. Okay, families, the children of the migrant workers and farm workers and immigrants are, the majority are born here in the U.S., but they're watching their parents struggle, work, 12-hour shifts a day. They're working 60-hour shifts a day, and they're tired, and they come home and they can't help the kids with homework. First of all, because they're tired, and then they don't speak the language. So a lot of kids, the education is being affected by this, and they're hungry, and they have very little to eat. So it's a multi-generational issue. It's not just the workers themselves. It affects their families, and that just trickles down into our education system and our economy. Okay, I mentor children. I tutor children in tutoring programs that specifically serve the migrant farm worker communities, and I see it. I see it on a daily basis. Food insecurity. I see kids struggling to advance in English and math because there's that language barrier, and their parents. People say they don't, learn to speak English, but they don't understand that they're working so hard. They have very little time to do that. So I think we need to be more sympathetic towards that. Okay, so what can we do to remedy the situation? We could, first of all, acknowledge that it exists. I think a lot of people don't acknowledge that this is even an issue. They just go and buy their produce, and they're not thinking about the carbon footprint of their food. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the issue. Then we can educate people in how we can make conditions better for workers, okay, that are working, migrant workers that are working the fields and harvesting our produce and our food, okay. Then we can help by supporting them, by opening pantries like the one that I run, which is called Dos Santos Food Pantry. Being able to provide food that's staple food for them, like rice, beans, corn flour to make tortillas, food that lasts a while. And then to be able to provide produce for them as well. It just seems like such an injustice that people that are harvesting produce and growing and harvesting produce can't afford it. They're getting canned vegetables. So if we could provide some of that, just help them a little, help make ends meet, that would go a long way. That's what we're doing, and we're trying to do, to make things better for workers. So it doesn't have to be anybody that speaks Spanish, or that, we can bring communities together, other farmers, other people in the community that see the workers, that see, hey, how can we help people? So if we can bring people together to help support the people that support our food, that would go a long way. And, it's just something that's very, very important. So in conclusion, food injustice affects a lot of people, okay? It affects migrant workers. It affects all of us who eat the produce and benefit from the nutrients of that produce. And now that you're aware of the injustices that exist, maybe you can think a little bit about where your food comes from, and you could help take practical steps to support the people that are harvesting and providing this food, and figure out ways to make things a little more fair for them, okay? Working conditions, pay, food insecurity, helping with their children, tutoring. There are many, many ways that as a community we can come together to help our migrant workers. And you're equipped now with this information, and it's up to you to decide what's the right thing to do. And, do you ignore it? Do you just buy the produce and eat it and then, benefit from it and don't worry about where that came from? Or do you think about it every time you eat, or you pray before you eat, and you pray for those workers, or you think about how their lives are affected, and what can you do on a local level, community level, to make things a little bit easier for them? You can ask, go to your local food bank, ask, how can I help the local workers? Or you can, reach out to people that are working in these arenas and say, hey, how can I volunteer? Or what can I do to help put a community garden in? Or what can I do to, bring a little bit of ease to the workers that are struggling under these harsh conditions and getting paid very little? Or when you see people talking negatively about immigrants or workers that come to help the U.S. and labor force, you can say to them, excuse me, did you know that, our U.S. government cooperates with agricultural companies to bring these workers in? So before you're quick to judge, remember, they were brought here to help us with our labor. So, things like that we can help educate and make the situation a little bit better for everyone. Thank you.